canoe was built in 1936 by W.J. Yarwood and Sons, Northwich, to the Grand Union Canal Carrying Company, powered by Lister Petter HP2. She worked the Grand Union, pulling her butty boat Neston until 1948, when she went to British Waterways. Leased to Willow Wren and then to Blue Line Carriers here in Braunston, where she worked with the butty Raymond, carrying the last loads of coal from the North Warwickshire coalfields to the Curly and Tonge Jam Factory in Southall. That was known as the Jamol Run. The butty Raymond behind her was built in 1958, and she was the last wooden narrowboat built in the United Kingdom. She worked for Samuel Barlow Coal Company, carrying coal from North Warwickshire to the paper mills around Watford. She was the last boat built for the famous Barlow carrying fleet. It exhibits their high standard of construction. Alongside the arm here, Friends of Raymond, raising funds to help keep Nutfield and Raymond in good working condition so that we can enjoy seeing them at events like this.
The boats travel from the base at Braunston around quite a large part of the Southern Canal system to and from established events. We go to boat rallies, local festivals up and down the canal system. The idea being that we are now there to show people what the canals were all about and how the boat people in the days of commercial carrying used to live, how they carried on their work, and trying to give people a feel for that history of the canals, if you like.
That's what it's about.
Our first event every year is the Inland Waterways Association's gathering, which takes place on the River Nen in Northampton. It's a great event, we enjoy doing it, but it does have a bit of a drawback in that to get to Northampton from the main line of the Grand Union Canal takes us down the Northampton Arm, which is quite a pretty little canal, but the snag is that the locks are only the old-fashioned, early design narrow beam. The locks are 7 feet wide, and so are our boats. So, whereas while we're on the Grand Union, we can run both boats through the wide locks together, when we go down the arm, it means the boats have to be worked through separately. Now, it doesn't sound to be too much of an issue until you remember that the butty doesn't have an engine. So, getting the motor down, which I have to say is usually the job I volunteer for, is the easy bit, because you can just trundle it down the same as you would with a modern boat. Getting the butty down the flight, and you have to remember there's 17 locks down the arm, all the way through, in each lock, the butty has to be hauled in to the lock by hand. And the top part of the arm, there are 13 locks in a consistent flight. So all the way through that part, somebody, I usually volunteer one of the crew, has to shoulder the rope and literally tow the boat on foot down between the locks, in and out of every lock. The hard part is getting the boat moving. It's that dead weight. I mean, our empty butty, although it's made of wood, probably weighs something like 10 tons, 10 to 12 tons. So as you can imagine, getting that shifting initially is quite hard work. Once it's moving, it's actually surprisingly easy. Then of course the other drawback with that, with no engine, you haven't got reverse gear, you haven't got any brakes. So it can be quite an art running the boat into a lock and getting it to stop at the right point.
Make sure I've got the largest ones as well.
When we're towing with a pair of empty boats, we use cross straps to tow the butty, because the most efficient way of doing it is to have the butty pulled up right close against the stern of the motorboat, so close that the stem post could be actually brushing against the fenders on the back of the motorboat. It means that the two boats pivot around that one point, so that running an empty pair of boats, you really, for the most part, don't need anybody to steer the butty. It will follow the motorboat wherever it goes, quite obediently, exactly the same way that an articulated trailer follows its tractor unit on the road. With our boats, when we're running through the wide locks down the Grand Union canals, when we work through the locks, obviously the lock is wide enough we can take both boats through at the same time, which saves us an awful lot of time and effort. So what we do is to what's called breast the boats up, side by side. As you come up to the first lock, the motor has to slow down and stop and the butty come up alongside. So the first thing you have to do is to unhitch the tow. Now we do this one strap at a time so that the butty first swings out to one side of the motor, and then as the motor slows down you knock the other strap off, which leaves the butty free to travel forwards under its own momentum. Now if you've got it right, it looks very good because the motor slides neatly into the lock, the butty comes up alongside it into the lock as well, and the two stop neatly together. If you get it wrong, it can look very embarrassing because you end up with two boats going in opposite directions. But again, we'll leave that aside. The theory is, and the practice usually, is that as the butty comes up alongside, there is already attached at the back to a shackle on each side of the hull is a short piece of rope with a loop on the end. And as the butty comes past, the motor steerer has to act reasonably quickly to grab that and then drop the loop over one of the stern dollies on the motor's counter, which pulls the two boats together and also, of course, stops the butty going flying past and hitting the lock gate. With that, what we call the breasting string hooked on, the boats are then tied together with a second short length of rope at the stern of the boats and a line across from the two fore ends to keep the bows together. Once that's done, the boats are then held tight together, and for the rest of the work through the flight, you can simply steer the boats as though they were a single unit. And that makes life a good deal easier for working through. One person then can steer both boats instead of you having to have somebody else to watch where the butty's going. If you're working breasted through wide locks, sooner or later, of course, you're going to come to the end of the flight. So at this point, you need to signal the boats out again. And the motor goes out on its own, and as you go past the front end of the butty, the two cross straps, the lines that we use for towing, are laid ready on the front of the butty. So you grab one quickly and again drop it over one of the dollies on the back of the motor. It sounds simple, and if it's done properly it looks very good. That short cross strap snatches the butty across behind the motor. You can then pick up the second one and drop it onto the other dolly, and lo and behold, there you are, effectively acting like an articulated lorry again. If you get it wrong, again, it can be quite embarrassing because the motorboat doesn't stop that quickly, and you end up with the butty steerer sort of waving frantically in the distance as you drift away from him. And you then have to put the motorboat in reverse, back up, and try all over again. Which is all right, but except that it always happens, of course, when you've got a large audience.
That's 50p. I'll give you back.
No, you don't. You're all right. You're short enough. Okay.
When you're acting as skipper on the boats, steering the motor, running along on cross straps, most of the time it's fairly relaxed. You're not travelling particularly fast. You're doing maybe 3 or 4 miles an hour over the ground. So there is time to sit and enjoy the scenery and cogitate upon the world and everything. That said, it's not something that you can ever afford to relax at completely. Even travelling at those sort of speeds. Like driving a car at low speed, you've still got to be looking in front of you, you've still got to be aware of what's going on around you, aware of what other people are doing as well. Even at 4 miles an hour, a pair of empty boats has got a lot of momentum. You can't stop quickly, so you need to be continually looking in front. You need to be anticipating what is happening and anticipating even what might happen, particularly when there are other boats about. You've got to be prepared for other people perhaps to get things wrong, which might put you in a difficult position. When we're running empty with the boats on cross straps, the butty steerer's function is to keep the butty from harm. You do need, in this day and age, to have a butty steerer, even on cross straps. You need somebody at the back of the butty watching what's going on, seeing what's coming up, because we have now to contend with a lot of overhanging foliage, trees, bushes, which can, if you run into them, can cause damage to the boat, scratch the paint, cause physical damage to the cabin, as has happened to us in the past. And of course, overhanging trees can very easily sweep off things from the roof of the boat. Because one of the hazards of boating nowadays is picking up things from the water. I mean, it's not a modern thing, it's always been a problem. A lot of things lie lurking on the bed of the canal until you go by, and then of course the turbulence from the propeller will often pick them up. One of the favourites, of course, is rope. Discarded pieces of rope, and they can be a real struggle to get rid of. They wrap themselves round the propeller with an almost intelligent kind of malevolence. Getting them off again can be quite a struggle.
Information about our boat, sir? Thank you.
I thought I heard somebody in my house a minute ago.
And sausages as well.
Brilliant.
Ducks that actually flash as well. And all I need is one mother.
Working the boats through locks, I say we do run with a minimum usually of 3 crew. You have obviously somebody who is in charge of the boats, somebody who's steering the boats. You need usually someone working in front of the boats to make sure that the next lock you come to is set and ready before you get to it. And then you need 1 or 2 people on the bank with the boats so that the gates behind can be closed, the paddles raised, top gates open, and so on to speed the boats through. The locks these days are very variable. It depends where you are, it depends how well maintained they are. Some areas you go, paddles can be raised very quickly, it's almost a one-handed job to put the paddles up. Other places, and this is true particularly of the larger locks of course, where there's more pressure against the paddle gear, it can be quite hard work. It's two-handed, and I'm reasonably fit, but even I struggle with some of the paddles getting up and down. As far as the gates are concerned, if you look on a modern lock gate, carved into it somewhere usually is its actual weight, and you'll find that on a wide lock those figures are usually well in excess of 1,000 kilos, and pushing on the beam sometimes is quite well, let's say it's good for the back and the leg muscles. When we take Raymond and Nutfield out on the canal to go to the various shows, it's a principle of mine, I know there are those who don't necessarily agree with me, that we always run the boats, as I would describe it, fully dressed. I like to see the boats with the chimneys in place, brasses all cleaned, water cans in place, the mop out, the cabin shafts out, everything done the same way that the old boaters would have done it. To me, it's important that even when we're travelling, we are on show, we are museum pieces. I think it's incumbent upon us to put that show on it's nice a lot of the time to see the reaction that we get from people around the canals, people walking, fishermen even, people on other boats. They see our old pier go by, and you know, the reaction, the smiles, the waves, very often the frantic grabbing for cameras, is it's amusing and it's very satisfying as well. You do feel that in taking those boats out, we are doing something that people appreciate, that people enjoy. On our travels, particularly on the Grand Union Canal, we're regularly passing through several tunnels. Tunnels are, on the Grand Union at least, about 16 feet wide at the waterline, so you've got plenty of room for boats travelling in opposite directions to pass each other. Not with a lot of free room, but you can pass quite comfortably. Now, boating through tunnels for the first time is quite an experience. Sitting there in a boat, in the dark, trundling along, barely able to hear yourself think over the clatter of the engine echoing off the tunnel walls. When you've done it as often as I have, frankly, it's totally boring. Personally, I'm quite happy when I see the hole at the other end getting bigger and bigger and we pop out into the sunshine again. One of the longest navigable tunnels in the country, I think it's rated as the third now, is Lisworth Tunnel, 1.75 miles long. Approaching the tunnel, I always make sure the headlight's on in good time so that anybody approaching from the tunnel can see us coming.
Okay.
So you've got to have a bag to carry all those.
Yes.
I find it immense fun to be out in charge of a pair of big boats. It's a very, very satisfying experience. It's one of the most enjoyable things in life, I would say.